O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other. Silence for a moment. Thank you. Today, Sister Subralina will speak on the second session of letter number 48. Now I invite Sister Subralina to start the proceeding. Sister Subralina.
Namaste. Today I am taking up the letter number 49, that is ML 48, part 2. Last week we had explored half of the letter, so today I'll take up the rest half. So there is this continuation to the natural laws, and what we see in the letter written is, but no one could ever violently break them without becoming the first victim to his guilt, to the extent of risking to lose his hard won share of immortality here and there. Remember, too anxious expectation is not only tedious but dangerous. Each warmer and quicker throb of the heart wears so much of life away. The passions, the affections are not to be indulged in by him who seeks to know, for they wear out the earthly body with their own secret power, and he who would gain his aim must be cold. He must not even desire too earnestly or too passionately the object he would reach, else the very wish will prevent the possibility of its fulfillment. At best, retire and throw it back. To many of us, this might seem a disturbing comment, or at least a very chilling one. But what is it that excites the heart to that warmer and quicker throb? Surely it is something quite low down in the scale of those many levels of motivation that are to be discovered in human nature. When we go searching for some form of knowledge that we can appreciate to ourselves, the body responds with some of its instinctive reactions. Probably more adrenaline is poured into the bloodstream, and there is a stimulation of many physical functions that have nothing to do with the knowledge. A doctor who worked in the psychological extern department of a hospital on one occasion suggested to a young man who was his patient that he should sit down each day in a comfortable chair for half an hour and just do nothing. The patient replied in great agitation, "But that would kill me." Behind such physical restlessness, there is great mental and emotional restlessness. The mind brings up an interminable series of pictures, each of which is associated with some obscure desire or anxiety. Aware that all this restlessness wears so much of life away, we are further agitated by a desire to stop it. Watching our images, feelings, we discover that they draw their vitality from the warmth of our own self identification with them. The images emerge from my memory, the feelings are my feelings, the body that fidgets belongs to me. And who's me? This questioning raises doubts as to whether me may not just be another image or feeling, and whether me is as necessary as we think it is. Is it not me who entertains those too anxious expectations and that warmer and quicker throb of the heart? Now, as we read more of the letter with respect to W. Oxley's philosophy of spirit, having received no reply to his summons to KH, he criticized in writing to Jwalakul's rather negative review of this book. And for that, Jwalakul answered, W. Oxley is the only one who has an inkling of truth, hence, the only one calculated to effectually help our movement. The man runs constantly in and out of the straight road, deviating from it every time he thinks he perceives a new path, but invariably returns to the right direction. I must admit that there is much sound philosophy here and there in what he writes, though he seems to have but very hazy notions about what he calls the astro-masonic basis of Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata, to both of which he evidently attributes the same author, yet he is positively and absolutely the only one whose general comprehension of spirit and its capabilities and functions after the first separation we call death are on the whole, if not quite correct, at least approximating very nearly truth. So while we read all these statements or all these comments, we must think through it. This is not about just writing a book or interpreting it. This is about how much each of us who's in the path is being observed, is being absorbed by the masters. Then there comes another paragraph which I would like to pick up. No, none. Not on that one special page opened before him and which he alone is reading in the endless volume of spirit revelation called seership. But why such stubborn oblivion of the important fact that there are other and innumerable pages before and after that one solitary page that each of the seers had so far hardly learned to decipher? Why is it that every one of those seers believes himself the Alpha and the Omega of truth? Now see, the Alpha and the Omega are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, signifying the beginning and the end or totality. Those who are seers of truth have concluded that of the non-existent, like the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. According to Bhagavad Gita, reality is that which is eternal, and unreality or illusion is that which is temporary. Illusion does exist, but it is unreal in the sense that it is not eternal. Someone may object, if I smash my head into a wall, the pain I feel is very real, physical level. How can it not be real? But if seen in the light of eternity, it's not real. Illusion exists, but the reason it is not considered real is because it is not eternal. It's like a dream. A dream happens, but when we wake up, we understand it was not real. Life in a material body is like that, dreamlike. We all realize that, if not before, then at the time of death. That is why death is a rude awakening. So reality and illusion is defined by time. One is eternal, the other is temporary. And if we think about it, it makes sense. Anything seen in the light of eternity will be manifested for such a short time that it is as if it did not really happen. Going further, there is this beautiful statement: immortality is by no means a matter of course of all, that souls shrink away and expire, it being the nature of them to burn out and expand themselves. Immortality implies a never ending existence, regardless of whether or not the body dies. Although a wide variety of cultures have believed in some sort of immortality, such beliefs may be reduced to basically three non exclusive models. One, the survival of the astral body resembling the physical body. Two, the immortality of the immaterial soul. Three, resurrection of the body, that is, re embodiment, in case the resurrected person does not keep the same body as at the moment of death. Now, students of occultism, even those who have been students for many years, sometimes seem to fail to realize the masters as they truly are. Their greatness is indisputable. And from that point of view, the gulf between them and ourselves may well seem incalculable in its extent, and yet, from another point of view, they are very close to us. So that their sympathy and help are very near and very real. Those who attain adeptship choose as their future career to remain upon the world and help directly in the evolution of humanity. Finds it convenient for their work to retain physical bodies. Masters and the Path is a book which, if you read, will see a lot of evidences. What does a master do? How these masters are helping the evolution, helping the humanity evolve. The limited number who are still working directly for us may be divided into two classes: those who retain physical bodies and those who do not. The latter are frequently spoken of under the name of Nirmanakayas. They hold themselves suspended as it were between this world and nirvana, and they devote the whole of their time and energy to the generation of spiritual force for the benefit of mankind. This force they pour into what may be described as a reservoir, upon which the masters and their pupils can draw for the assistance of their work with humanity. The Nirmanakaya, because he remains to this extent in touch with the lower planes, has chosen to remain upon lower planes in order to help those who still suffer. It is quite true that to come back from the higher life into this world is like going down from the fresh air and glorious sunlight into a dark and evil smelling dungeon. But the man who does this to help someone out of the dungeon is not miserable and wretched while there, but full of the joy of helping. Indeed, a man who refused such an opportunity of giving aid when it came to him would certainly feel far more woe afterwards in the shape of remorse. When we have once really seen the spiritual misery of the world and the condition of those who need such help, we can never again be careless or indifferent about it, as are those who haven't seen. Then the next passage, which I thought we should be, contemplating and understanding, that is, as we do not require a passive mind, do not require a passive mind, but on the contrary, are seeking for those most active, which can put two and two together. Once that they are on the right scent, we will, if you please, drop the subject. Let your mind work out the problem for itself. Now, what is this passive and active mindset? The passive mindset is defined by an attitude, an assumption that life happens to us and we are not responsible. People with this mindset also say things like, why does this always happen to me? Only the inquiring mind solves problems. When we all hear some suggestion and different opinions on any subject, most people just accept the opinions whichever suit to their own beliefs. Most people would not even question the validity. A person with active mind will know to be alert and to be always questioning and formulating answers. We do not live not only in a physical environment but in an emotional and mental one as well. Just as the air that we breathe is part of our physical surroundings, so our thoughts and feelings become part of the emotional and mental environment in which we live. We all know it, we have experienced it. This unseen environment exerts a persistent but subtle influence upon us, even if we are not aware of its existence. For instance, many of the random passing thoughts that we entertain throughout the day do not necessarily originate from our mind, but may instead have their source in the prevailing mental atmosphere. This happens particularly during those instances when our mind becomes momentarily idle and is not engaged with any specific thought process. Many spiritual traditions recognize the importance of purifying the mind of evil and harmful thoughts by cultivating the habit of holding positive and inspiring thoughts throughout the day. And we all know our mind is the result of our past thinking, both in this life and in previous lives. Each person's mind has its own unique rate and range of vibration. It has certain tendencies, strengths, affinities, weaknesses, and imperfections, all of which are the outcome of previous patterns of thought. A theosophical view of the nature of mind is offered by Madame Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine. Mind is a name given to the sum of the states of consciousness grouped under thought, will, and feeling. During deep sleep, ideation ceases on the physical plane and memory is in abeyance. Thus, for the time being, mind is not, because the organ through which the ego manifests ideation and memory on the material plane has temporarily ceased to function. Even in Bhagavad Gita, the way it is defined, mind is defined as a sixth sense, an eternal portion of myself, having become a living soul in the world of life, draws to itself the five senses with the mind for the sixth, abiding in nature. Now, how does this functioning go on? Let us read further. There is another passage. Little by little, the now incomprehensible will become the self evident, and many a sentence of mystic meaning will shine yet out before your soul eye like a transparency illuminating the darkness of your mind. Like darkness on earth, darkness of mind exists in blocking, deflecting, or obstructing light. Those are good thoughts and happiness, which we pursue naturally. But once darkness of the mind blocks happiness, anxiety, depression are subject to spread. For once the funnel cloud has been spun, the winds of darkness can self sustain and become a blackened tornado. tornado. If we explain that the mind is in the incessant flow of thoughts, to cognize the flow of thinking, we need light. We can read a paper in daytime because there is sunlight. The writing on the paper is not self-luminous. Where there is light, the inert thing cannot be seen. Similarly, thought is not self-effulgent. The mind is illumined for us to be by the intellect. Light is an ignition, a spark, a flame. The light of awareness is so subtle and absolute that it illuminates not only the various sources of light in the world, but also the experience of darkness itself. The light within illuminates the mind and gives out a semblance of light. And it is with the help of this light that it is moving about. In our preoccupations with life, we refuse to look into this within. The center of light, the light of truth. But if our gaze turned ever outwards, we attach much value to the things material, gross, and physical. We miss the divine spark and see only the reflected beam. If reflected light can give so much glory, the condition and glory of the one who is the very embodiment of truth, what would be that condition? So further it says, such is the course of gradual progress. A year or two back, you might have written a more brilliant, never a more profound article. Neglect them. Not, my good brother, the humble, the derided journal of your society, and mind not either its quaint, pretentious cover, nor the heaps of manure contained in it, to repeat the charitable and to you yourself the too familiar remark used often at Simla, but let your attention be rather drawn to the few pearls of wisdom and occult truths to be occasionally discovered under that manure. When it comes to acquiring spiritual wisdom, the truth is what, while many of us may desire, there are probably few who know what it really is. Wisdom is not the same thing as knowledge. As a matter of fact, we can very easily be acquainted with facts, truths, or principles. But if we do not apply this information to our life, we are actually the opposite of wise. One of the greatest pearls of spiritual wisdom that life can ever give us is that for as long as we are living, we will never have all of the wisdom we need. What we learned yesterday was enough for yesterday. We should keep ourselves aware that every moment we will be open to the new things that life wants to teach us. As we evolve, so do the messages that we must add to keep the spiritual evolution going. Then in the letter, it is written, many of us would be mistaken for madmen, but he who would become a son of wisdom can always see beneath the rugged surface. So, with the poor old journal, behold, its mystically bumptious clothing, its numerous blemishes and literary defects, and withal that cover, the most perfect symbol of its contains. The main portion of its original ground, thickly veiled, all smutty and as black as night, through which peep out grey dots and lines and words and even sentences. To the truly wise, those breaks of grey may suggest an allegory full of meaning, such as the streaks of twilight upon the eastern sky at morning's early dawn, after a night of intense darkness, the aurora of a more spiritually intellectual cycle. Now, what is this journal being referred here? The Theosophist is the monthly journal of the International Theosophical Society. It was first published on 1st October 1879 by Madame Blavatsky and has been in production continuously since that day. The cover of the first issue stated that this was a monthly journal devoted to Oriental philosophy, art, literature, and occultism, embracing mesmerism, spiritualism, and other secret sciences. Both HPB and Olcott were journalists, and so was their co-worker, Mr. Sinnett. As journalists, they could not be afraid of controversy. The three were directly involved in the experience of the Theosophist, the search for truth, even in difficult circumstances, and its acceptance under whatever form it may be, are part of the development and growth of mental principle towards the rebirth of the spiritual principle in human consciousness. Moving further, it is stated, no, you will not be snatched away from your study before you have thoroughly mastered the alphabet, so as to learn to read by yourself. And it depends but on you alone to nail forever the too attractive vision that seems to you now to be fading away. To read, observe, explore by our own self is a great method to enhance our learning experience. So, by practicing self study, we can take control over our own learning. Exploring any topic on our own will give us an opportunity to actively engage with the information. Otherwise, we'll just read and forget, we'll not capture things. Making ourselves engaged with the thing, being there with that particular learning, will gradually help us get the real meaning of that. We will be able to think more deeply and make connections between what we are learning. Each of us has his or her learning pace. We know somebody would, derive very fast, somebody would be very slow in, deriving the information and, contemplating, thinking, making out the real meaning hidden in it. So till we mastered the topic of our learning, it totally depends on how we keep pace with the progress. Things will never reveal on their own to us, but it is totally upon us how we can take charge of our challenges and overcome them. Being consistent, curious, and holding on to the experience we go through in our daily transactional life will bring clarity step by step. Progress might be slow and not visible to our naked eye, but the very motion of progress is steady and continuous. That's why the letter also says, on close observation, you will find that it was never the intention of the occultists really to conceal what they had been writing from the earnest, determined students, but rather to lock up their information for safety's sake in a secure, safe box. The key to which is intuition. The degree of diligence and zeal with which the hidden meaning is sought by the student is generally the test. How far he is entitled to the possession of the so buried treasure. Every human being is born with the inner sense called intuition, which may be developed into second sight. The power to know does not come from book study nor from mere philosophy, but mostly from the actual practice of altruism in deed, word, and thought. For that practice only can purify the cover of the soul and permit that light to shine down into us. Every one of us possesses the faculty, the interior sense, known as intuition, but how rare are those who know how to develop it. It is, however, the only faculty by means of which men and things are seen in their true colors. It is an instinct of the soul which grows in us in proportion to the use we make of it. The more we use, the more it grows within us, and which helps us to perceive and understand real and absolute facts with far more certainty than can the simple use of our senses and the exercise of our reason. Only the fragments of the great song come to our ears, but if we listen to it, remember it faithfully, and endeavor to learn from it the meaning of the mystery which surrounds us, we can learn from it that we are part of the harmony. The third objects of the TS to investigate unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. If we read it if we contemplate on it, if we really try to understand what are those unexplained laws of nature and what is that power latent in me, probably it will more grow in us. It will help us to perceive, having clarity. So these letters which are written to Mr. Sinnett, this is only a indication how we use our senses, our intelligence, our intuition, our diligence and zeal. These are the qualities mentioned in this. The more and more we are doing it, automatically that buried treasure will open up. We will get to learn it. Maybe slow, but definitely we'll get it. So this is all about Mahatma letter number 49, that is ML 48. Whatever I could observe from the book, from this particular letter, I try to share with you. I know everybody's sharing will be different because probably next time I will read it, I'll get some other meaning. Books are like that. But this is what I learned from the book and I shared with you. Thank you.
Oh, just I am on. Now you can unmute.
नमस्ते. थैंक यू सिस्टर, थैंक यू ब्रदर. आज हम महात्मा लेटर नंबर 48 का कंटिन्यूएशन में ले रहे हैं. यह लेटर मास्टर KH AP सिनेट को लिखते हैं. वे कहते हैं, कोई यदि हठपूर्वक प्रकृति के नियम भंग करता है तो अपने अपराध का वह खुद शिकार होता है. यहाँ तक कि उसकी कड़ी मेहनत से हासिल अमरत्व को खतरे में डालता है. अति उत्कंठा युक्त उम्मीद अपेक्षा मार्ग पर अवरोध ही नहीं बल्कि हानिकारक हो सकती है. दिल की प्रत्येक तेज धड़कन शक्ति को क्षीण करती है. जो सत्य प्राप्ति का इच्छुक है उसे लालसा, अति उत्साह, स्नेह, अनुराग इनमें लिप्त नहीं होना चाहिए. यह विकार अपने गुप्त प्रभाव से भौतिक शरीर को क्षीण करती है. अपने उद्देश्य प्राप्ति हेतु उसे अनासक्त होना चाहिए. अपनी भावनाओं के प्रति उदासीन होना चाहिए. वह अपने लक्ष्य के प्रति, उद्देश्य प्राप्ति के प्रति बहुत उत्सुक न हो या बहुत जोश न हो. नहीं तो वही चाह उसके ध्येय पूर्ति में अवरोध उत्पन्न करेगी. इससे छुटकारा पाना ही अच्छा है. मास्टर कहते हैं कि जिन्हें ज्ञान की झलक मात्र मिली है, ऐसे लोग केवल वे ही ज्ञानी होने का दावा करते हैं. लेकिन उन्हें यह विस्मरण होता है कि ज्ञान की किताब में से उन्हें सिर्फ एक पन्ने की झलक मात्र मिली है, जिसके पहले और बाद में अनगिनत पन्ने हैं, जिनका बोध करने में दृष्टाओं को शायद ही सफलता मिली है. फिर भी वे क्यों खुद को सर्वज्ञानी समझते हैं? अमरत्व सभी के लिए स्वाभाविक रूप से घटित होने वाली बात नहीं है, और ऐसा भी नहीं कि जीव मुरझाकर, सिकुड़कर नष्ट होता है. असल में जीवों के निम्न स्व का भस्म होकर उच्च स्व का विस्तार होना है. मास्टर कहते हैं कि हमें निष्क्रिय मन वाले नहीं चाहिए, हमें सक्रिय विचारवंतों की खोज है, जो सही संकेतों को पहचान कर विषयों की गहराई तक जाए, सत्य का बोध करे, अपने मन मस्तिष्क द्वारा स्वयं कठिन विषयों पर विचार करे, उनका हल निकाले. जो बातें अभी गहन लगती हैं, वह स्पष्ट होती जाएगी और आपकी अंतर्दृष्टि के सामने अनेक रहस्यपूर्ण वाक्यों का अर्थ स्पष्ट रूप से प्रकाशित होगा, जैसे कि मन के अज्ञान रूपी अंधकार का प्रज्वलित होना. इसी प्रकार उत्तरोत्तर प्रगति होती है। 1 या 2 साल पहले शायद आपने बहुत गहन नहीं लेकिन प्रभावशाली लेख लिखे होंगे। ऊपरी तौर पर अनाकर्षक दिखने वाले द थियोसॉफिस्ट के जर्नल को नजरअंदाज न करें। आप उसके लेखों में छिपे ज्ञान और गूढ़ सत्यों की तरफ ध्यान दें। प्रज्ञावान व्यक्तियों को अक्षरों में गहन अर्थ भरे दृष्टांत नजर आते हैं, जैसे अज्ञान रूपी घोर अंधकारमय रात के बाद पूर्व की क्षितिज पर आत्मबुद्धि रूपी प्रातःकाल की प्रकाश किरणें। आपको अपने अध्ययन से कोई रोकेगा नहीं जब तक कि हर एक शब्द पर प्रभुत्व प्राप्त करते हो, खुद के बल पर उसे आप समझ लेते हो। जो बातें अभी आपको धुंधली नजर आती है, उसे ज्ञात करना यह सिर्फ आप पर निर्भर करता है। जिन जिज्ञासुओं को गूढ़ ज्ञान संपादित करने की इच्छा है, उनसे ज्ञान को छुपा कर रखना ऐसा गूढ़वादियों का उद्देश्य कभी नहीं था। सिर्फ वह गूढ़ ज्ञान सुरक्षा हेतु ऐसे सुरक्षित तिजोरी में बंद किया जाता है जिसकी एकमेव चाबी यानी अंत प्रेरणा है। आकांक्षियों की गूढ़ ज्ञान संपादन करने के लिए लगन, परिश्रम और उत्साह ही उनकी परीक्षा है कि वे इस गुप्त खजाने पर अधिकार के लिए कितने हकदार हैं। धन्यवाद। नमस्ते।